Hello and welcome to Pulmonary Rehab's educational videos. My name is Julia O'Shea and I'm a respiratory therapist who works in pulmonary rehab at the University of Vermont Medical Center. So in this video, we are going to be talking about breathing, how we breathe, and retraining the body to breathe more efficiently, which is very important for people who are living with lung disease. Okay, so let's begin. So I'm going to be covering just a little bit of the anatomy of the respiratory system. We will have a whole nother talk on the anatomy, but in order to understand how we breathe, I'm just going to kind of give you a little surface level view of the anatomy. So why do we breathe? And I know everybody's probably thinking, well, to stay alive, or at least that's the answer I usually get. Yes, to stay alive, but let's dive a little deeper into that statement. So when we look at the breath cycle, or the inhale and the exhale, what we are doing is we are inhaling the air in the atmosphere, and we are bringing oxygen into our bodies. So the oxygen molecules, tiny molecules, move in with the air and move into our alveoli, into our bloodstream, and then our blood, our heart pumps it to the rest of our body. So this oxygen is our energy source. So that is what helps to convert our nutrients, or the fuel, the food that we eat at the cellular level, into the energy that we need to keep our body running. So that's what is referred to as the cellular respiration. So we breathe in that oxygen that our body needs, and then the byproduct of this cellular respiration is the carbon dioxide. So we don't need that anymore. And so we exhale carbon dioxide. So basic building blocks of the entire respiratory system: breathe in the oxygen and exhale the carbon dioxide. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the diaphragm, which is the primary muscle of breathing, and then I'll also talk about some of the other smaller muscles, which we refer to as accessory muscles. So the diaphragm, of course, I'm a respiratory therapist, so it is my favorite muscle in the body. It is responsible for the majority of the air that we move in and out of the lungs. And you can see on the picture here, it kind of takes this shape like a parachute. And I like to use my hands as the example of the diaphragm. So when we take a breath in, if my hands are the diaphragm, this little dome, as we inhale, the dome moves down, so it makes space for the air to come in, and then when we exhale, it moves back up. So every time we breathe, every breath we take, when we inhale, diaphragm moves down and makes space for the air to come into the lungs. It pushes down on the abdominal organs, and then as we exhale, it releases and moves back up. And if you want to get even more deeper into the physics behind this, there is an element of negative pressure that's generated when the diaphragm moves down, which helps to allow the positive pressure in the atmosphere to move in. So for all you science nerds out there, there's some trivia for you. So as we talk about the accessory muscles, we're talking about muscles that are much smaller than the diaphragm. And because they're smaller, they don't work as efficiently. So we can't rely on them for breathing. We have to count on our diaphragm to do its job the best way that it can in order to really move the air in and out of our lungs. But these little muscles, there's so many of them, but I'm just gonna keep it really basic. So we have muscles that are located in between each rib. There's two sets that crisscross. One set helps to expand the rib cage, so as we inhale, the ribs expand out to the sides, and then the other set of muscles helps to contract, or to bring the ribs back together. So again, every time we breathe, these muscles are helping with that expansion and contraction. And then we also have a lot of muscles that are around our neck and our shoulders. And we'll talk more about this as we teach you the exercises in class, because so much of what we're doing in the exercises pertains to the biomechanics of the lungs, or the mechanics. So how well does the rib cage and all the muscles that assist with breathing, how well they work with our breathing? And if there is an area of tension or weakness, how can we work to improve or to release the tension? Okay, so I'm going to go over a quick little video that was created by this woman named Jessica Wolf. So she's a Alexander technique specialist, and I've looked all over YouTube, and this has been the best video that I've been able to find. So let's see if I can pull this up so you can see it. And I will pause the video periodically just to chat. Okay, so rib cage movement. You can see there's quite a bit of movement here, and this goes back to what I just mentioned. So the mechanics of the lungs. Some of us may not have this full expansion of the rib cage, simply because maybe there were accidents, or maybe because there's tightness in areas of our body, maybe around our back or our sides, and the ribs just don't have that ability to move or to expand the way this video is showing. Not to say that you can't get that back. So again, part of the exercises and the stretching that we do in the program are to help to increase this potential of the rib cage movement, which allows for more air and better lung expansion. So ribs moving side to side. And then we have the shoulder blades that you can also see glide with the rib cage expansion. So yes, there is a biomechanical connection between our shoulders and how we breathe. And then here it's showing the diaphragm, and then the organs will start to appear as well. And I'll try and pause it right about now. So here, and I'm pretty sure you can see my pointer, we have the abdominal organs. So this dark red organ is the liver that sits on the right side, and you can see the diaphragm takes its shape from the liver. It's a very large organ. We have the lungs that are sitting on top of the diaphragm, and on the left side we have the stomach, and we have the intestines, and then she's also showing this muscle which is called the psoas, because the psoas is connected to the diaphragm, and it's also connected to our lower body. So it's the primary muscle that connects the upper and lower body. And then now she's showing the back. You can see the tiny kidneys over here. More muscles that are involved with breathing. Again, we refer to these as the accessory muscles. But really, as you look at this video, and you can go back to this anytime and watch it again, there's some nice music that she plays with it. But really the takeaway from that video is to just see the shape change. So as we breathe, we are not just breathing, you know, in this one-dimensional upper chest shape. It is three-dimensional. We breathe into the back of the lungs. On the back side, our lungs are actually much larger than the front. So no matter whatever position we're in, and you'll see us teaching you, different exercises where we might lean to the side, we are opening the different areas of the lungs. And so we're kind of retraining the brain to recognize that potential to breathe differently and to breathe into the different sections of the lungs. Okay. All right, so I'm going to briefly talk about the breath and lung disease, and you will get this repeatedly from me talking about the different types of lung disease, but this is kind of the introduction. So when your doctor or your pulmonologist is initially diagnosing or trying to figure out what's going on with your lungs, very generically speaking, they based on your pulmonary function test, your spirometry, they'll classify you into two different disease categories. So there's obstructive lung disease and restrictive lung disease. So obstructive lung disease, examples of this are emphysema, some types of asthma, maybe cystic fibrosis, chronic bronchitis. The umbrella term is COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So with obstructive lung disease, it's kind of like the name sounds. So there's an obstruction in your lungs that makes it hard for the air to come out. So you typically can take a breath in, fill up the lungs, and then when you go to exhale, there could be issues with your airways that are preventing the air from coming out. Could be issues with mucus, just various different types of things that basically make that exhale a little bit harder. And what can happen as the air fills up and gets kind of trapped in your lungs is that the air will push down on the diaphragm. So if we go back to the diaphragm, which is this parachute shape, when the air gets trapped, it'll flatten the diaphragm. And there's a term that we call hyperinflated. So the air is pushing down and the diaphragm doesn't have that same ability to move up and down because of the pressure of the air that's pushing down. So it makes it harder to breathe. It makes you feel more short of breath. What can happen is that those tiny little muscles around the neck and the rib cage, they try to help. And sometimes people have to really use those muscles and use their body. And if you can kind of see me, they go into different types of recovery positions to help them catch their breath. So obstructive lung disease, think about it's just harder to exhale. Now with restrictive lung disease, examples of that would be sometimes we call it interstitial lung disease, meaning that it's not so much a problem with the airways and the air sacs in the lungs, it's more the lining around the air sacs or around the lungs. Examples would be pulmonary fibrosis, some neuromuscular diseases that make it harder for the mechanics of the lungs to work, even obesity. So depending on the size of a person, that can create a restriction on their lungs. So with, as you would imagine with restrictive lung disease, it's harder to take a breath in. It's harder to get that air into the lungs because whatever is causing that rigidity or stiffness. Usually no problem exhaling, you can get the air out just fine. And then in some cases, there's a combination of the two. That's not uncommon either. Okay, so that's just kind of the overview of the types of lung disease and how our breathing is impacted by that. So we're here to talk about what we can do to help. And one of the things that through the course of pulmonary rehab I try to teach you is to really pay attention to how we breathe. And I feel like it's something that most people don't do. You know, you just take it for granted and your attention doesn't really go to the breath until you're short of breath. And then it definitely has 100% of your attention. But learning to pay attention to how we breathe so that naturally we can impact or we can improve the way we breathe, the way our lung mechanics work. So when I talk about the breath cycle, and I mentioned this earlier, I talk about the inhale and the exhale. So generally speaking, if we can exhale a little bit longer than the inhale, that can allow for more of the air to get out. So that's beneficial for obstructive lung disease without a doubt, because if you think about the air, it can get stuck inside. So if there's air trapped in my lungs and I'm taking smaller or shallow breaths, then I'm not breathing very efficiently. But if I can exhale a little bit longer, I can get more of that air out, and I can make more space for that next inhale, that fresh air to come in. And really with restrictive lung disease, it's very similar. So we want to be able to make space. We want to be able to exhale, get as much of the air out so that that next breath comes in and is much larger. So really thinking about the timing. So typically we might say that we inhale for a count of 3. We could say 1, and then maybe exhale for 5. And just think about the timing, just lengthening that exhale. This will make a lot more sense once we talk about the different types of breathing techniques. Okay, so other factors that can affect your breathing. So as you can see by the skeleton on the screen, this is me working on my computer, but posture. So posture definitely impacts the shape of the lungs, thus impacting the way we breathe. So you'll hear us talk about the mechanics of breathing quite often, because what we know is that we can't necessarily go inside the lungs and change the air sacs in the airways. But what we can improve through pulmonary rehab is the mechanics, or how the skeleton, the tissues, the muscles around your lungs, how they work. And posture is one of those things that, you know, I could sit here and have my brain engaged telling me, sit up straight, sit up straight, sit up straight. But over time, gravity's going to win. It always does. So what we do is we do the work to stretch and release different areas of tension, so that naturally posture will start to happen. Less effort dependent on remembering to sit upright, and more just of a natural posture. So working through respiratory muscles to strengthen some of the muscles that might be more weak. Lifestyle affects breathing. So I usually point the finger to stress, but also a reminder that if we can find ways in our lives to cultivate more relaxation, our breathing will slow down quite a bit. So if you've ever laid there in a relaxed state and notice all of a sudden that you sigh, so you just take a deep breath. That's your body relaxing. So that's the part of the nervous system that is very closely connected to the breath. So if we can tap into more of that relaxed lifestyle, or the ability to find a way to relax, then that can help to change our breathing for the better. And then using your nose to breathe. So our noses are designed specifically for breathing. They warm the air, they humidify the air, they filter the air. It's really where you want the air to move in order to get down into your lungs. And I'll talk about that much more in the anatomy talk, but just think about breathing through your nose as best as you can. And I realize some people have different, issues. Maybe there's a deviated septum or blockages, things like that in their nose. So no worries if that's what you have going on. You just do the best you can. Okay, so we use the term breathlessness cycle. So what this is just describing what can happen when you are short of breath, or, for whatever reason. Say you ran up a flight of stairs, didn't even think about it, and then you got to the top and you noticed that you were panting, you're huffing and puffing. And what can happen is you start to breathe faster. So if we think about that cycle, the inhale and the exhale, if our inhale breaths are more or greater than our exhale breaths, and we're breathing really fast, that air can start to get trapped in the lungs. So the more the air that builds up, it becomes much harder to breathe, because you're literally moving less air in and out of your lungs. And so this is just showing, what can happen. So you get shorter breath, anxiety kicks in, or panic. And then you start breathing faster, and then the muscles start to tire out, And then shortness of breath increases, anxiety increases, and it just goes on and on and on. So we are learning how to change we breathe so that we can manage situations like this. So hopefully that they happen less often would be the goal. So recovery positions. So if you were to end up in that breathlessness cycle, sometimes people find recovery positions beneficial. And this is one of those things that's different for everybody. So for some people, their bodies are just very intuitive and they go right into a position that helps them to catch their breath. And these are just some suggested things. So for some people, they lean over in a chair and they might use their shoulders or their arms to help catch their breath. The picture of the woman, she has her hands on her knees. You might even feel like you need to stand against a wall and allow the shoulders to move back to create more expansion. Some people lay down. Everyone's different. So just kind of playing with, you know, what shape do I want my body in order for me to breathe with the most ease. And you can practice that anytime. It doesn't have to be just when you're short of breath. Okay, so pursed lip breathing. You're going to hear this term quite often. And if you have not been taught this breathing technique, it's one of the easiest breathing techniques that you can do. And whether you have lung disease or not, I still feel like this is a very powerful breathing technique to practice. So what this is you inhale through your nose. And if you can't inhale through your nose, that's okay. You can still just use your mouth. But inhale through your nose. And then when you exhale, you pucker up or you purse your lips. And the key here is the ability to use your lips to create like a tiny little hole. So that pursed part creates pressure. So what's happening is we're inhaling, we're bringing the air in and getting that oxygen into the lungs and then blowing out through pursed lips with pressure at our mouth. And so the physics behind this is that the pressure at the mouth goes down through our airways into our lungs. So if we have areas of the lungs that are not as open as we want them to be, that pressure will be carried down into our air sacs and help to open things up. And if you practice that while I was talking, you might notice that your exhale gets longer as well. So here it's showing the picture on the PowerPoint. The gentleman is inhaling for 2, and then he exhales for 4. So it helps to lengthen our exhale. Because the amount of time that we're inhaling and exhaling changes, so it lengthens, it also allows more time for oxygen to travel into our blood and be spread through our bodies. So it's not unusual that I might see someone using pursed lip breathing and then their oxygen levels go up temporarily while they're doing the breathing. It can also be very relaxing because if you think about it, it can also help to calm you down. So this breathing technique, we encourage it with exercise. And not to say that it's easy to do when you're huffing and puffing, but it can definitely, if you can get 1 or 2 in every once in a while, if you're walking or, you know, maybe before you go up the stairs, it can definitely help to get some of that air out so that when you do start breathing harder, you may not feel as short of breath. So here are some tips on the screen. Don't blow too hard or too fast. You can blow as if you're blowing on a spoon with some hot soup. And my favorite little saying is smell the flowers and blow out the birthday candles. So I know nobody watching this has a lot of birthday candles to blow out, right? And if we were in person, I would give you pinwheels. We don't have the pinwheels, but you could imagine blowing, maybe the bubbles. Right now it's dandelion season, so once those go to seed, you could imagine blowing all those little seeds. And we'll practice this in person and it'll make more sense to you. Okay, another breathing technique is called diaphragmatic breathing. So we just learned about the diaphragm, right? The muscle that sits underneath here. And what this is, it's a breathing exercise that really focuses on the diaphragm. And there's different ways to do this. You can do this, so the picture shows that person laying down. So you can lay down and practice that way. You can sit upright as well, whatever feels more natural. With this type of breath, it is much harder to do this with exercise. So we won't tell you, do your diaphragmatic breathing with exercise. We'll say, do your pursed-lip breathing. But diaphragmatic breathing is basically bringing your awareness into the bottom of the lungs where the diaphragm is. And so as we know, right below our diaphragm, we have our abdominal organs, which are made out of liquid. So the body is comprised primarily of liquid, except for, or I should say water, except for our lungs. And so when we inhale and the diaphragm pushes down, it's pushing down onto our organs. And what can happen is the organs move, or the belly moves. Sometimes I refer to this as belly breathing. And so with this, you can see my hands. When I inhale, my hands will expand, and then when I exhale, they move back in. This is one of those breathing techniques that does take a fair amount of practice. It's much harder than pursed-lip breathing, and you can use pursed-lip breathing while you're doing your diaphragmatic breathing. One of the benefits is that it can help to promote relaxation. So the diaphragm is connected to our nervous systems in a very specific way through one of our nerves. And if we can engage the diaphragm in a relaxed way, it can help to calm the nervous system quite a bit. So it's a good technique to practice. All right. So here's some more tips for diaphragmatic breathing. You can lay or sit upright, have your hands just below the rib cage, middle fingers barely touching. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose. And just use your imagination. So even if you don't feel that expansion, it's okay. The diaphragm is moving, trust me. So there's this element of actually feeling the movement, and then also just imagining the movement. So everyone's different. So it may not come naturally the first time. It will likely take some practice. And I'm here as a resource. Your physical therapist, Tony and Diane, are great as well. And we'll be checking in with you guys on a one-on-one case to see if you need any help with these different breathing techniques. Okay, so the last breathing technique I'll talk about is called three-part breathing. And again, this goes back to what I said earlier. So becoming more aware of how you breathe, where you breathe from. So the three parts of this breath are the upper chest, up here, the rib cage, side to side, and then your belly or your diaphragmatic breathing. So what this would look like is you start with the diaphragm, with the belly breathing. So here, when you breathe, there's this movement out and back in. So shape change, out and back. Second part, rib cage. So here, side to side. So remember we watched that video, and I think of like a one of those fireplace bellows where you pump it side to side. The ribs are very similar. They have this hinge joint. So when we inhale, expand out, and exhale, move back in. And then the third part is the upper chest. So here, as we inhale, there's a rise, Chest moves up, exhale, back down. In this PowerPoint, there is a YouTube video of a yoga instructor teaching this breath. I don't expect you to look like her when you do it. Obviously, she has a lot of practice, but she does a really good job, and she's wearing the type of clothing that you can see that expansion. So when you put it all together, and before you do the full 3-part breath, I would rather you practice each part individually. Come to me, come to one of the physical therapists. Let us know if you have questions, if you're like, I'm really not getting this certain area, and we can sit down with you and we can watch you and we can give you tips. But the full part breath is inhaling into the belly, the ribs, the upper chest, and then exhale, upper chest, ribs, belly. So it's bottom, fill up, exhale, top to bottom. Inhale, bottom to top. Exhale, top to bottom. So again, one of those techniques that just takes practice, and really the whole idea behind it is to just start to understand how the mechanics of the lungs work, and that we have that ability to breathe better than we think. All right. Putting this all together. So practice, 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 just like anything else. So you could, what I usually recommend is practicing in the morning and at night. It doesn't have to be long. It can be for 2 minutes or whatever you have time for. So in the morning, you know, you're probably waking up. You could practice pursed lip breathing, get more oxygen going into your blood will definitely help with waking up, almost as good as a cup of coffee. Throughout the day, you can practice pursed lip breathing anytime. If you're walking, you know, watching TV, maybe commercials or whatever, incorporate it into your life. So pursed lip breathing is amazing anytime. Diaphragmatic breathing takes a lot more concentration. So this is where, if you have a space in your house that you can be alone or find quiet time, then it would probably be easier to practice that type of breath. Same with the 3-part breath. With anything any breathing exercise that you're new to, start slowly, because the body may not be used to you taking all these deep breaths, and what can happen is you might get lightheaded. So also start in a chair or laying down, just in case you get lightheaded. So there's no surprise if that were to happen. Just be aware of your posture. Yes, we're all interacting with gravity. If you do work at a screen or a desk, you know, maybe every once in a while remind yourself to sit up straight. And you know, there's different techniques that we'll teach you that will help to release tension around the neck and shoulders, which helps to improve the posture. And then muscle tension release and relaxation. So relaxed muscles use less oxygen. Over time, the more you practice this, the more it'll start to happen naturally. And we will practice once we are in person. So hopefully that wasn't too long. Hopefully you didn't fall asleep. And look out, world, I officially know how to breathe. There's no stopping me. So I look forward to practicing with you all in person, and get your questions ready, and I'll see you soon.